Welcome to the Mojave Wasteland Podcast, Episode 5. Today we're going to be talking about shipping firearms and salvage. Recently, my computer went kaput, so I had to redo that to get back to operational capacity, and I've had a couple other personal things that I've been dealing with, so this one has been delayed almost by 2 weeks, which is pretty bad. But at least we're back in business. I was going to have a Danish friend do an interview with me, since he's been around the Mojave. Unfortunately, our timing never quite worked out right, so I'll have him come on in a later episode. But for now, we're going to be talking about the basics of shipping a firearm. So I'm going to set up a scenario for you, one that I've been through quite a bit recently, where you have a firearm that you've sold to somebody online and you've received payment for them. But then what happens? What are you supposed to do? You can go to an FFL, but not all of them do shipping anymore. I mean, there's a few of them near me that used to, where I'd take a gun to them, I'd give them the information of the other FFL to ship it to, and then they would process it. But they don't do that anymore just because it got to be a pain in the butt for them. And if you're confused as to what I mean by FFL, that's the term that we use for a federal firearms license holder, or basically a business that's authorized to sell firearms to the public. All FFLs do have to have the purchaser fill out a Form 4473, and that stays with the FFL holder as part of their records. So let me take you through the process real quick of just purchasing a gun if you're completely unfamiliar with it. You walk into a store. It depends on state to state because some states have a waiting period, which I think is ridiculous. But anyways, you walk into a store, you find a firearm that you like, and you want to purchase. Now, a lot of places like pawn shops and gun shops will do layaway on it, so you can put down money and pay as you go. But let's say that you walk in, you find a shotgun, a Mossberg 500 that you really want right then. So you decide that's the one I want. The employees at the shop go and get a Form 4473, have you fill out the front half of it and one line from the back. And you have to go through and answer all these questions. You know, are you under indictment? Are you a criminal? Are you legal? What's your ethnicity? And your address, your name, your social security number, and all of that. After they get that information, then you turn it over to them with your license. And if you have a concealed carry permit, you hand that over as well. They'll call up BCI, which is the Bureau of Criminal Investigations. They'll call in the information on the 4473 and your information as well. They'll get an approval from BCI or a disapproval. Now, a disapproval means you did not pass the background check. You are not cleared to own this firearm. So at that point, they have to completely deny you everything. They can't give you the firearm, they can't sell it to you, or any of that. An approval, though, means that you are cleared for it. So they'll write down more information in the Form 4473, put that aside, hand you back your licenses and everything. And then you pay them the money, they hand you the firearm, and some states require trigger locks before the firearm goes out the door. Utah doesn't. Utah has the option that you can get a trigger lock with the firearm or not. It doesn't really matter. And personally, I think trigger locks are ridiculous anyways. After you pay them the money and they ring up the sale and everything else, then you can walk out with a firearm unless you're in a state that has a waiting period. So that's the basic process of buying from an establishment. And that's where the Form 4473 comes in. But all the establishments you buy from that you'll fill out that form from are FFL holders. And even at gun shows, you still have to fill out the Form 4473 because there's not such a thing as a gun show loophole. That's a complete bit of misinformation that I'll cover in a little bit here, exactly where the lines are getting crossed there. On the other side of things, though, you have a purchaser, let's say in California, who buys a rifle from you, and you have to send that rifle to California. Well, first off, you have to know if the rifle is California legal or not in its current configuration. If it's not, then there's no way to really send it to California. If it is, if it's something like, say, a Mosin-Nagant or a Enfield bolt-action rifle, both of them are legal in California, Then what you have to do is, after the person pays you, you have to get the information from them of which FFL that they want you to ship the rifle to. Then you contact that FFL, tell them up front what your intentions are. You sold this person a rifle. You need their license, a copy of their FFL license for shipping, so you can ship the rifle directly to them, and then they'll handle the form 4473. I bubble wrap the rifle, I put it in a box, and then I seal that up, and then I go down to my local FedEx, which for me, my local FedEx is 35 miles away. But I go down there, I walk in with a copy of the FFL license, and then I hand that over to them, and I tell them, yes, this needs to be shipped there. And typically shipping through FedEx is pretty cheap. I mean, I think the most I've spent has been $20, and that was because the rifle was going really, really far. It's generally about $16 to ship rifles through FedEx, and that's really, really nice. So I highly recommend shipping through FedEx for any of your gun purchases, because they're very friendly with firearms. And they'll ask you standard questions. Is it loaded? Is there any ammunition with it? You can't ship ammunition with the weapon. You can ship it separately. So after you send it off through FedEx, that goes to the FFL. You'll let the person know that when it comes in, and they'll talk to the FFL as well. They should. And so as soon as the rifle comes in, they can go and pick it up. And then they have to fill out that form 4473. They have to go through all that spiel again that I just went through. And then they can take the weapon home with them. And that's basically what selling over the internet is. So now if you were going to be doing it through FFL to FFL transfer, so I go to an establishment with the rifle and I say, I need this sent to another establishment, that's where the prices come in, because they'll charge you a fee to send it, which will be anywhere from $20 to $30. The FFL that receives it will charge a fee for receiving it and processing it. So it gets to be a little bit of a complicated mess. It's just much easier to go down to your local FedEx. And remember, you have to have everything packaged properly, or else FedEx won't take it, and they will not make packages for you. You're responsible for everything that you do. So that being said, let me take a step back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier and talk about the gun show loophole and where that misinformation comes from, as far as my understanding is. Now, there's others of you that might have a better grasp on this misinformation, but as far as I'm aware, this is where it comes from. Now, in America and in most states, you can do what's called a private sale and say, okay, I have this AR, I want to sell it for $500. Somebody goes, well, I've got $500. Can I buy it from you? Yeah, and that's perfectly legal to do. They can hand you $500, you can hand them an AR, and that's perfectly fine. There's no background check involved, and it's pretty much at seller's discretion. Is the seller responsible if the person who purchases it goes and shoots up a school? I would say no, and the law says no, because the seller is not responsible for what the purchaser does with whatever they buy. So if somebody sells somebody a used car, are they responsible if that person takes the used car and maliciously and purposefully runs over people at a marathon? No, they're not responsible for selling the used car. Same thing with the gun. They're not responsible for whatever the purchaser, the buyer, does with that gun. Now, there's a little bit of a thing here which is on the seller to kind of check out exactly who they're selling to. And I do that a lot with a lot of firearm sales. I've done personal ones. If I don't feel that the deal is right, if I don't feel that the person's kind of quite right, I won't make the sell. And I've had people before call me up and say, damn it, I need the gun right now. You got to sell it to me right now. I don't ever deal with anybody like that for two reasons. Number one, they sound like a complete asshat. And I don't want to have to explain to cops or anybody else why a gun that has a serial number under my name was used in any type of crime. And I just don't deal with people like that. And the other one are the people who don't say anything to me at all. They just like, yeah, I want it right now. And I'm like, okay, well, we can set up a time and a place to meet. Yeah, okay, whatever's fine. That kind of gets me a little wary as well, but I've done deals like that before. And usually if you meet the person in person, you can get a really good feel on them. And I'll talk to you more about how to do deals like that in just a second. So the gun show loophole, from what I figure, comes from the fact that you can go to a gun show and there are people there that want to sell their firearms that are walking around. They're not part of the vendors there. They're not part of the people who have bought booths there. And sometimes you'll see somebody have like a dowel down the barrel, little, wooden rod down the barrel of whatever gun with a sign that says how much it is and all that. A lot of these people you can walk up to and be like, oh, hey, I see you got a cent or I see you have a FAL or an AK on your shoulder with a sign on it. You're asking $500. I've got $500. Here you go. And they'll turn over the rifle to you, and that's that. And it's at a public place. It's not an established seller. It's not anybody who holds an FFL. That is legal in most states to do that. Now, there's might be some caveat or something that you have to kind of look up, and it's always on you to know the laws that you're dealing with in any given state. Pleading ignorance is no excuse. That's where I think the gun show loophole comes from, and that's where I think a lot of people are freaking out about. But one of the prime examples are people from Illinois say that you can hop across the border into Indiana, their gun shows, and buy guns from Indiana. You can't do that. Now, you might be able to this way, but for the most part, you can't do that. And I'm not even sure if Indiana allows private sales at gun shows like that. So let's talk about what the best things to do with the private sale are. So generally, I keep all communication to text just because I like to not be in audio contact with people because I keep odd hours and I don't want them calling me while I'm in the middle of sleep or anything else. And generally, when they call me, I don't have all the information right then on the firearm. If they ask something really oddly specific, sometimes they do. Say if it's a Maznagant and they want to know what year it was or what the receiver markings are. I don't know that off the bat. Generally, I know the year. But if it has any type of extra receiver markings, I don't know that. And so I have to go, okay, if I'm talking to them on the phone, I have to say, all right, well, hang on a second. Let me pull it out. And then I have to get it out of the gun case or gun safe and take a look at all of the markings. And I have to address what their issues are with them. And then I have to be polite and all of that. And I just like to do that much more over text. And especially if they want specific pictures of a specific area of the gun, then you can just snap it with your phone and send it over text. So I always deal with text first. Then after somebody wants to purchase a gun from me, I set up a time and a place to meet. I usually do it if I'm selling a gun. If I'm buying a gun, I'll ask them to set up a time and a place. But for the most part, I'll do it only when I'm selling. So, and I like public places like Walmart parking lots. They have cameras everywhere, or parking lots for your local grocery store, Home Depot, that type of place. So you want to be far enough away that you're not bothering anybody else and nobody else is going to bother you, but you want to be close enough that you have video surveillance in case anything goes down. So when that happens, when we set up a time and a place to meet, I always arrive early. And I always tell people where I'm going, and I will call them immediately after the deal is done. So let's say I set up a meet for Walmart parking lot, and I'll use one of the cities close to me, Washington, which is right near St. George, which is near the Arizona border on the Utah side of things in southern Utah. So I decided I'm going to meet at the Washington Walmart, which it has a huge parking lot. It's one of the biggest Walmarts in the state. And I'm going to meet there at noon, and I tell my friend Joe that, okay, Joe, I'm going to be calling you by about 12:15. If you don't hear from me by 12:15 to 12:20, then give me a call, and if I don't respond, then something's up. And I've never had an issue with this yet, but there's always going to be that question. There might be a time that somebody pulls a gun on me and shoots me and takes the gun with them. You never know. But just better to be safe than sorry. So I'll get there pretty early, about 10 to 15 minutes beforehand, just to be able to keep an eye on the situation. And I'll be listening to music on my phone or whatever. Person rolls up, and you also want to describe what type of vehicle you're in too. For me, I drive at the current a little orange Saturn, so it's very easy for people to recognize what that is. And you want to get what their vehicle is too. And I always, since I'm a bigger guy, I'm fat, there's no way around that. I just tell them I'm a fat guy or I'm a big guy in an orange Saturn, and I'll be at this part of the parking lot. So keep an eye out for me. And by this point too, if we've done text, I've got their phone number as well. And so if they're running late, if it's past time, I'll give them a text or I'll give them a call just to see where they're at. If it's not past time, then at least I've got that number as an added layer of security just to see where they're coming from. I've got a record of our messages too in case anything happens, so police can look at my phone and all of that. They'll come in, they'll park next to me, I'll come out, I'll shake their hands. I won't even have the gun on me or anything at the moment. They'll be in the car. And I'll be like, hi, I'm Eric. We talked over the phone and everything. Let me show you what I've got. And I'll open it up and I'll let them handle it and everything. It's always going to be unloaded. I never put ammunition in the magazines if I'm selling ammunition with anything. They'll look it over. Sometimes they'll try to negotiate. Other times they'll just hand me the money immediately. You always give them a final handshake. You talk a little bit if they want to talk. If they don't want to talk, if they just want to get out of there, then let them go. And that's generally the process that I go through with it. I've done almost 100 private sales over 15 years, and I've never had one of them go wrong. And I've had other ones where people will sit there and talk your ear off for an hour. I've had people show up that I didn't even remember that had known me from other sales, and we will talk about various things. And I've had people show up, hand me the money, look over the firearm, go thanks, and walk off. It's just depending on the type of person. And that's the easiest way to do the deals that I found, and the most safe way. So if you're ever doing any type of private sales through Arms List, or if you're in Utah, through Utah Gun Exchange. I mean, KSL used to be a big thing, but they took that down 4 years ago, unfortunately. Or any of the other listing sites like that, where you're going to meet up in person. This is one of the better ways to do it. So now that we've talked about purchasing firearms and shipping firearms, let's talk about salvage. So the Mojave Wasteland has salvage up the ass. I mean, there's just about anywhere I can go out here. And I can find abandoned vehicles, I can find abandoned equipment, such as farm equipment, mining equipment, stuff that people didn't really want to scrap or didn't want to take to the dump, so they just dumped it out in the middle of nowhere. Other places like entire towns which have been completely abandoned. I want to scrap all of it. I want to take it all apart. I want to get into the machinery of it. I want to pull out the really cool little cogs and gears and all of that. But I need to figure out, first and foremost, who it belongs to, if anybody. If it doesn't belong to anybody, then it's fair game. If it does belong to somebody and it's on their property and you start tearing it apart, you're legally liable for that, and you can be jailed for it. So the first thing first that you have to do when you're going to go salvage a place is you have to contact the local government and see exactly who owns the area. Now, the way that I like to do that is I like to contact the city or the local state government. And generally, if the city can't help you, the state government can help you. And they'll have more up-to-date maps and understand exactly where it is. You want to get an exact point of where the machinery is, of where the scrap area is on a map. And so you can 100% show them exactly where it is. And if you can get GPS coordinates, that's even better. So I walk in there and I'll tell them, hey, I found this abandoned site out there. I found this abandoned piece of thing, and I need to know who it belongs to and to contact them to see if I can get rights to it, to salvage it. And the local government, somebody at the clerk's desk will be like, okay, well, I can help you with that. I can look up the maps and see who the property area is, who the owners, who pays taxes on that. Or like the state government can say, okay, well, I can tell you if it's public land or if it's BLM land or whatever. And we can work through it that way. If it falls under private land, then I can ask them, the people that are helping me, if I can have a contact information for the people who own the land. Half the time they won't really have the contact information on hand, or they won't be giving it out to you. The other half the time they will. And it just depends. You just have to kind of work the angles. You have to be nice and sweet about it. If they do end up giving you the contact information, be very, very nice to the person who owns the land. Generally, it's a phone number or it's an address that you can send mail to. And so if it's an address that I can send mail to, I'll write them a very nicely worded letter saying that I came across this out in the middle of nowhere. I would like to be able to take it apart for pieces in there. I would like, this is in the letter, and then I would like to have their permission to do so. And then I'll send that letter off to them. And fortunately with letters, I don't get a response about 80% of the time. 20% of the time is when they do respond, and then half of those responses are telling me no. The other half of the responses are generally, well, if you scrap it for any value, then I want half the value for it and all of that. I don't deal with that too much unless it's something that's really worth scrapping, just because scrap metal hauling and values and all of that are so crazy these days compared to when I first started that there's almost no profit in it for me. But if it's on public land, nobody owns it, and somebody just abandoned it out there, and you've done your best to figure out if anybody owns the area, then you're good to go. And some states have this weird little thing where it has to be out there for more than a year or two, depending on what state it is, before you can scrap it, just in case if it's like a Jeep that broke down, just barely broke down out there, and somebody had to walk into town and they haven't quite gotten anybody to get out there and haul it out yet. Obviously, that's not going to be something that somebody just abandoned out there. But if it's like an old 1940s style car that's so rusted out and the windows are busted out and everything, that's completely different. So what I'll do is I'll have my salvage kit, my scrapper's kit. And that basically just has a propane torch for loosening up bolts and all of that. A big can of WD-40, duct tape, big pair of channel lock pliers, big pair of vice grip pliers, a nice adjustable wrench, a couple other little needle nose pliers, a few garbage bags, and a few little freezer bags for parts and everything that I can put into there. Some nice work gloves, a 2-pound sledgehammer, and a good set of screwdrivers. And that's generally all I need to be able to take apart everything. So let's say if it's a car and I want to get at certain parts of a car, and if it's an old 1940s Dodge that has been out in the middle of nowhere for 60 years and is rusted shut, you want to get out there and you want to be able to pry open the hood and to be able to get in there and take apart parts where you're going to be dealing with a lot of rust. So that's where the WD-40 comes in handy, or that's where the propane torch comes in handy, because you can loosen up the bolts and everything. Propane torch, you might set parts of it on fire, little rubber bits and everything, but that's all right as long as you are in an area that everything else won't catch on fire. You have to be very careful with that. So maybe a little fire extinguisher might be a good thing to carry too. But then you get in there and you start breaking the parts down, and then I always just take what I can carry out with me. I don't take anything too heavy. And so I've got like a little bin at home with various parts from salvage projects I've gotten, or I found huge dumps of barbed wire out there in the middle of nowhere that nobody claims. So I'll take the barbed wire home, I'll make things with it, I'll use it in other things. Salvage is basically just you come across something out in the middle of nowhere, you got to figure out who it belongs to, and if it's on land that you know nobody owns, you can take. And there's a lot of crazy stuff that I've found out there. Like, most of it, for some reason, are garden hoses. I don't know why people love to dump garden hoses in the middle of nowhere. And every time I come up on one, I always think at first it's a snake, and so I get a little excited because I love snake hunting, but it's not. It's always a damn hose. Barbed wire or baling wire out there is everywhere, and there's sometimes big bales of it that you can pick up and take with you. The scrap value on it is negligible, but you can use it for other things. I mean, I use baling wire to repair a lot of stuff in the course of whatever I'm doing. Barbed wire is really good accents too, like if you put it on a helmet, if you make a club with it, it's really cool stuff. And then a lot of the times too, you'll find old porcelain doorknobs from doors that have been out there. I don't know where the door went, but the doorknob's out there. I'll find old paint cans or old oil cans that people still are willing to pay a little bit for if they're in decent enough condition. I find bottle caps everywhere. I swear I have bottle cap radar. So people will go out in the middle of the desert, drink a 6-pack or whatever, flip their bottle caps around. I'll be able to go out to a campsite and I know exactly where the bottle caps are. And I'll generally be able to recover all of them for all the beer bottles that are in the area. Even if they're under sand, I just have that weird ability to know where they flicked the bottle cap. But the funniest thing I've ever found out there has got to be a green dildo. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story here that I've told before, and my dad absolutely hates me telling because, well, you'll see why. We weren't even scrapping, I don't believe. I think we were just out in the middle of the desert, and there's a little place called Sand Hollow Reservoir, which is beautiful. It's a little, basically a blue sapphire of water out in the middle of nowhere. Has some of the best bass fishing in the entire West. And people out of Las Vegas run bass tours up to Sand Hollow for the fishing. There's a little bit of an overlook that's now private property, but at the time it was public property that you could drive up to and you could look over Sand Hollow. Now my dad wanted to get up there and take a look at the area. So we drive up to this little overlook and get out, and I'm looking around down on my feet and in the bushes just trying to find things. Every once in a while I'll find like some .22 ammunition which hasn't been set off, or I'll find a couple things which are worth keeping, and I found this giant green dildo that was battery operated. I shouldn't say giant because it wasn't that big. It was probably about 8 inches, so a little bit bigger than an average one, but I just started laughing because it was up there, and clearly it had been used. I mean, or had been out there for a long time, one or the other. And my dad was staring at it, and he didn't quite connect what it was at first. And then I told him it was a dildo. And he goes, "Oh, well, I guess some woman out here used it." And I told him, or some guy. And I've never seen the color go from his face quicker than that. I've never seen, this guy is an ultra-conservative Mormon, and he's really not exposed to anything like that. And he just kind of shut up, kind of went back to the car, didn't say anything. I think it was a little too much for his brain to process. But I had my .22 revolver on me at the time, so I picked the dildo up with a set of sticks because I wasn't going to touch that damn thing. And I moved it over to a little bit of an area, and then I put a couple cylinders through it, so 12 rounds through it with the .22 revolver, and it was fun. But that was the time I found a dildo out in the middle of the Mojave. And there had been other stuff out there too, like there's a lot of used condoms at campsites, a lot of whiskey bottles. Sometimes you find some really nice older bottles that are all embossed and are almost Prohibition era, which is really cool. And then another one of the best things I found was an entire sack full of goggles that were Bakelite and steel and glass. And I saved the best pair of them for me, and then I sold all the rest of them on eBay for a little chunk of change. But salvage out there in the desert or anywhere else that you might live is a good way to occupy your time, to get out and to do things. There's a lot of YouTubers that you can watch that do salvage type things, where they'll go through rivers or they'll go through old homestead sites and they'll metal detect it or they'll dig things up and they'll look for stuff. And that's basically what I like doing. If I find an old site, I like to just poke around and see what I can find there. And I never really make any money at it. I mean, sometimes I'll make enough off some things to pay for the gas out there, or to maybe pay a day's worth of wages, but it's never anything that I can make a lot of money at. But it's what I enjoy doing. It gets me out, it gets me into a new open area, and it just gets me exploring. That's what it's all about, really. I mean, it's just to get out and have fun. So I'm happy that you guys could join me for the Mojave Wasteland Podcast this week, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Thank you very much for all the support you're giving me.